The wooden door creaks open. A young woman sits motionless on a small bed, hands trembling as she smooths her civilian dress. She's in Block 24A, where the rules were different. A male prisoner enters, escorted by an SS guard who watches through a peephole. The woman's face remains expressionless as she prepares to endure what Heinrich Himmler coldly described as her contribution to the productivity of forced laborers. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget, wrote Holocaust survivor Charlotte Delbo. For the women forced into sexual slavery in Nazi concentration camps, this memory would become a burden many would carry in silence to their graves. The existence of brothels within Nazi concentration camps represents one of the most disturbing, yet least discussed aspects of the Third Reich's system of exploitation. The term Sonderbau, special building, was the Nazi euphemism for these brothels, established in 10 concentration camps between 1942 and 1945, including Auschwitz, Buchenwald, Dachau, and Mauthausen. The idea originated with Heinrich Himmler, who in a letter to Oswald Pohl dated March 23, 1942, wrote, "I consider it necessary to provide in the most liberal way hard-working prisoners with women in bordells." This initiative was part of a broader incentive system designed to increase productivity among non-Jewish male prisoners through rewards such as cigarettes, extra food, and brothel visits. The first camp brothel opened in Mauthausen in June 1942. Contrary to popular misconception, these brothels were primarily intended for privileged non-Jewish prisoners, not SS officers who were officially forbidden from using them, though this rule was frequently violated. The women forced to work in these brothels were themselves prisoners, predominantly those classified as asocial by the Nazi regime. How the Nazis built camp brothels. After Himmler's initial directive, the SS Economic and Administrative Main Office issued the Dienstvorschrift für die Gewährung von Vergünstigungen an Häftlinge, service regulations for granting privileges to prisoners, on May 15, 1943. This document formalized the premium system that included brothel visits as rewards. The brothels were designed with clinical precision, small rooms arranged along corridors with peepholes in the doors for SS surveillance. In Auschwitz, Block 24A housed the brothel, located near the main gate of the camp. In October 1943, the brothel in Auschwitz I opened on the upper floor of Block 24A. According to survivor accounts in SS records, approximately 60 women were selected from Auschwitz-Birkenau's women's camp to serve in this facility. As former prisoner Oswald Pohl recalled in his memoir, Annus Mundi, the women selected for the brothel were given better food for some time before starting work, allowed to grow their hair, and provided with civilian clothes to make them more appealing to the male prisoners who would be their clients. The brothel system represented a particularly insidious form of control and dehumanization. By creating a sexual hierarchy within the camps, the SS effectively turned some prisoners into exploiters of others, fracturing potential solidarity among inmates. For the women forced into sexual slavery, the psychological trauma was profound. They faced a horrific choice: certain death through starvation and exhaustion in the regular camp, or survival through sexual exploitation. The number of women forced to work in each facility varied from as few as 6 in Dachau to as many as 20 in Auschwitz. The price for a visit was standardized at 2 Reichsmarks, equivalent to the cost of 20 cigarettes in the camp canteen. Each visit was strictly limited to 15 minutes, and only the missionary position was permitted, with SS guards monitoring compliance through peepholes. The women chosen for sexual slavery. The selection of women for forced prostitution followed specific criteria established by the SS. Heinrich Himmler provided explicit instructions. Only such prostitutes may be selected for the camp brothels who, based on their previous life and attitude, can be assumed to be beyond redemption for an orderly life later on. In practice, this meant that women already categorized as asocial, marked with a black triangle, were primarily targeted. Women selected for brothel service underwent a preparation process that included medical examinations, improved rations, and exposure to sun lamps to improve their complexion after months of malnutrition. Margaret W., whose testimony is one of the few first-hand accounts from a survivor of the camp brothel system, described her transfer from Ravensbrück to Buchenwald in July 1943. Upon arrival, they were taken to a furnished room, a stark contrast to the barracks they had known. The female overseer informed them, "You are now in a prisoner's brothel. You will live well here, with good food and drink, and if you do as you are told, nothing will happen to you." Margaret was assigned to room 13, where she would be forced to service multiple men each evening. She later described these as the accursed evening hours. The women forced into camp brothels experienced a unique form of trauma that combined sexual violence with the broader dehumanization of the concentration camp system. Their position created a cruel paradox. While they received better food and living conditions than other female prisoners, they were subjected to repeated sexual trauma and social isolation. As historian Robert Sommer notes, almost all the women in forced prostitution survived the Nazis' terror regime. It is largely unknown what became of them or whether they were ever able to recover from their traumatic experience. Most of them remained silent about their fate for the rest of their lives. Initially, the SS attempted to recruit women by promising them release after 6 months of brothel service, a promise that was never kept. When this deception became known among female prisoners, the SS resorted to direct selection. Women who contracted sexually transmitted infections were sometimes subjected to medical experiments rather than treatment. Pregnant women were forced to undergo abortions. Jewish women were never selected for brothel service due to the Nazi prohibition on racial defilement. Prisoners who visited power and desperation. Access to the camp brothels was strictly regulated through a system of permits and privileges. Only non-Jewish male prisoners who had demonstrated exceptional work performance could apply for brothel visits. The process required submitting a formal application, undergoing a medical examination, and paying 2 Reichsmarks. Jewish prisoners and Soviet prisoners of war were explicitly forbidden from visiting the brothels. The brothel visit itself was a highly regimented experience. Prisoners would be escorted to the facility, their names and numbers recorded, and then assigned to a specific room for a strictly timed 15-minute encounter. In the Buchenwald concentration camp, prisoner Edgar Kupfer-Koberwitz described the brothel visit procedure in his secret diary. "You wait in the hall, an officer records the prisoner's name and number, then a number's called and the name of the prisoner in question. Then you run to the room with that number. Each visit, it's a different number. You have 15 minutes, exactly 15 minutes. Another survivor from Dachau, Josef Seidler, recalled how the opening of the brothel divided the prisoner population. Some political prisoners called for a boycott. On the first visiting day, it was a beautiful sunny day. Only a single political prisoner registered, an Upper Silesian whom we regarded as a fool. All along the long camp street, the political prisoners from all nations formed a gauntlet and made fun of the outsider. The motivations of male prisoners who visited the brothels were complex and varied. For some, particularly those in privileged positions within the camp hierarchy, brothel visits represented a demonstration of status and power. For others, especially those who had been imprisoned for years, the desire for human contact and intimacy, even in such a controlled and exploitative context, was overwhelming. As historian Robert Sommer notes, often it didn't even get as far as intercourse. Some men were no longer physically strong enough, and some had a greater need to talk with a woman again. or to feel her presence. The popularity of the brothels varied significantly across different camps and time periods. In some locations, like Dachau, political prisoners organized effective boycotts that initially limited attendance. However, records show that usage increased over time. According to surviving SS records, on October 24, 1944, 76 prisoners visited the brothel in Dachau in a single day. Despite this, the total percentage of camp inmates who ever visited the brothels remained small, less than 1% of the total camp population. Betrayal, silence, and forgotten victims. After the liberation of the concentration camps, the existence of camp brothels quickly became a taboo subject. For the women, the stigma of forced prostitution, combined with the fact that many had been categorized as social prisoners, meant that they were often excluded from the emerging narrative of Holocaust remembrance. Unlike political prisoners or those persecuted for their religion or ethnicity, women forced into camp brothels were not recognized as victims of Nazi persecution in post-war Germany. The case of Frau W. illustrates the post-war fate of many former forced sex workers. When she applied for compensation as a victim of Nazi persecution in the 1950s, her claim was rejected because she had been categorized as an asocial prisoner, a group not recognized as legitimate victims under West German compensation laws. It was not until the 1990s that some women who had been forced into camp brothels began to receive any form of recognition or compensation, and by then, most had already died. The post-war silence surrounding camp brothels reflected broader societal discomfort with sexual violence and exploitation. For survivors of forced prostitution, this silence compounded their trauma, denying them both recognition and support. Many internalized the shame imposed on them by society, believing that they had somehow been complicit in their own exploitation. The absence of these women's stories from the dominant Holocaust narrative also reflects gendered aspects of historical memory. The experiences of women, particularly those related to sexual violence, have often been marginalized in accounts of war and genocide. The historical recognition of camp brothels and the women forced to work in them has evolved slowly over time. It was not until the 1990s that serious historical research on the topic began, with works by scholars like Christa Pohl and later Robert Sommer bringing this hidden history to light. In 2007, the Ravensbrück Memorial Site created the first exhibition specifically focused on sexual forced labor in Nazi concentration camps, marking a significant step toward public acknowledgement of this aspect of Holocaust history. Old wounds, modern echoes. The history of Nazi concentration camp brothels holds particular relevance today as we grapple with issues of sexual violence in conflict zones and human trafficking worldwide. The experiences of women forced into camp brothels also resonate with contemporary discussions about consent, coercion, and survival in contexts of extreme power imbalance. The story of the concentration camp brothels reminds us that the Nazi system of oppression operated not only through overt violence, but through the manipulation of human needs and vulnerabilities. By forcing some prisoners to participate in the exploitation of others, the SS created moral dilemmas that have no easy resolution. The women who survived sexual slavery in the camps carried a double burden: the trauma of their experience and the silence imposed upon them by post-war society. In acknowledging their suffering today, we affirm their humanity and recognize that a full accounting of historical atrocities must include all victims, even those whose stories challenge our comfort.